Hi, my name is Joel Ackerman, and I am the Assistant Professor of Horn at Utah State University. I'm here to provide some general musical and technical tips on how to perform this year's UMEA All-State Horn Etude. As with previous years, this selection is taken from auditionsolos.com and is selection 3C. Be sure you are taking the A ending as you prepare this etude. This etude is in C minor, so also pay attention to your key signature. Especially make note of that change to C major at measure 14. This etude is in 3 parts. A stormy opening minor key section that has a primary focus on fast and articulated notes, a middle lyrical section in the major key, and then a brief return of the opening material with a flourishing finish. Since the opening and ending sections address the same basic issues, we can think about using the same tools to fix those issues we encounter in both sections. We see the Italian description con fuoco, literally with fire. With that as your suggestion, you might think about racing off with the tempo for this etude, but I would recommend not straying very far at all from the printed tempo marking of quarter note equals 100. Rather, rely upon an attention to musical details, in particular articulation, to create that fiery sensation. Compared to other brass instruments, however, there are 2 unique characteristics of the horn that make it hard for us to produce that really clear articulation. The first, obviously, is the fact that our instrument faces backwards. The fact that the horn's sound travels backwards before reflecting forward is a feature of the horn's characteristic sound and why people have fallen in love with its sound for hundreds of years. But it's also why generations of horn players are constantly being told to play out, or, even more frustratingly, are reminded that their entrances are late. So, we have to overcompensate with our articulation compared to these other brass instruments. Now, we're trained to use a syllable starting with a T sound when we start a note, and I absolutely agree with this. However, think about how you and your friends might pronounce a T when you're talking, especially how you might say a tongue-twisting phrase like, 2 toads totally twisted. Your tongue probably starts to feel thick, and those T's get a little bit harder to pronounce clearly, which is the same problem we run into with horn playing, because, again, we're using that T for each articulated note. So in your practice, work on developing a clear and repeatable articulation that has a bit of a push of air behind it. Try shouting, Thomas, and you'll notice how you might use your abs to push the air out. You get a more prominent start to that T, and that's what I'd like for you to try and replicate when you're playing the horn, especially to help give an extra emphasis to those accented notes, or the sforzando that happens right at the beginning of this etude. If you can let your abs push rather than pushing from your embouchure, you can let a much larger muscle group do all of the heavy lifting so that your face won't get quite as tired easily. To your ears, this really pointed T articulation will sound quite aggressive at first, but again, keep in mind that your horn points backwards, and so as that sound reflects forward, it will not be perceived quite as harshly once it reaches the audience. Now, the second characteristic that affects articulation is our right hand placement in the bell. Now, we need to keep our hand in the bell to help fix intonation issues, but if our hand is obstructing most of the bell, it's as if we're speaking with a hand over our mouth, no matter how much we've practiced developing that crystal clear articulation. So, I recommend trying to hold your right hand almost like you're preparing to shake someone's hand, with your fingertips all close together, and ever so slightly place your thumb next to, or even better, slightly on top of your index finger, just like this. Inside the bell, your hand should be all the way to the right side of the bell. Your fingernails against that side of the bell, and with your hand inserted to about where the top and bottom of your hand touch the floor and ceiling of the bell. It doesn't need to go too much further in than that. With this hand position, you should have a clear opening between the palm of your right hand and the left side of the bell. Make sure that your wrist isn't coming too far over to block that opening. Notes played with a more open hand position like this have a more dynamic and ringing sound rather than a more dampened sound that a closed hand position like this, or one that makes too much contact with the bell. Think of the horn's bell like any other bell. If there's too much contact, it dampens the sound, so let your bell ring out. One additional practice tip I might recommend for passages with tricky fingerings, such as the chromatic 16th note groups in measures 10 and 11, is to try looking at your fingers as you're playing. This is a bit of an awkward passage for the fingers, and sometimes what we feel we're playing is not quite lining up with our fingers. It's a bit disorienting to play and stare at your fingers, but if there is that disconnect between what you think you're playing and what your fingers are doing, this is a great way to help line them up. So, while we always tend to focus on note accuracy, even if you played without missing a single note, but you leave out the dynamics, the judges are probably going to find your interpretation boring and lacking in musicality. And we are, after all, trying to play music, so I encourage you to really exaggerate these written dynamics. Again, because our instrument faces backwards and we hear things very close to our right ear, and we might be used to playing in small rooms and have our bell kind of close to that wall, it's hard to feel comfortable when we're playing out, so I encourage you to occasionally seek out bigger spaces that will feel more comfortable to you when you're playing out. I would love to hear a clear distinction between the forte dynamic that we have at the start with the fortissimo that we have in the fourth measure. Even more dramatic should be that sudden shift to the second line to mezzo piano. Now, as we descend in the horn's range, low notes tend to naturally get softer, so even though we are trying to showcase a softer sound there, because we're descending into this mid-low register, make sure not to let the sound get too soft. Don't forget to take the A ending, which is a return of the opening material, but with a triplet fanfare that builds to that fortissimo A flat in measure 26. If you're struggling to get those mid-range, mid-E flats to speak clearly, try using the B flat side of the horn. Personally, I prefer to use the F side in this register of the horn, as I think it produces a more pleasant tone color. But sometimes in music like this, we may find the B flat horn preferable to get cleaner articulations. And for those final three notes of this etude, really spit the accents out. Think about saying ti-te-to quite aggressively. Now, contrasting with these technically focused outer sections is the middle section starting at measure 14, which is a great opportunity for us to showcase a refined and lyrical style of playing. Give yourself enough time to take a deep, relaxed breath in that character and slightly slower tempo of this style that you want to convey. Again, we have a key change here to C major, so make sure that first note is an E natural, not an E flat. Through this section, keep the air moving for a smooth connection between notes and allow the tempo to ebb and flow just a bit, especially with a little bit of length added to those tenuto 16th notes in measures 16 and 17. However, something you may be struggling with is just how to keep the air moving for that smoother connection. If you listen to some of your favorite singers, you may notice that many of them tend to have just a bit of a slide between pitches, especially if they're singing across a wide interval. This is a very expressive and natural gesture with the human voice, but it can be kind of hard to figure out how we can do that on the horn. So one of the best ways that I have found in my own practice is to try lyrical passages buzzed on the mouthpiece, trying to create a smooth glissando between notes. The key to keeping that gliss smooth is to keep steady and consistent mouthpiece contact with your embouchure so that we can have a steady vibration and therefore a buzz going. Sometimes when we're playing, we push our lips out just a little bit too much like that, and changing to or from that might shake our embouchure just a little bit. There are, of course, many great horn players who have figured out how to make that work and keep the vibration going. But in my own experience, I think it becomes easier if we try to minimize that by keeping the gliss on the mouthpiece very consistent and smooth. It forces us to let the changing airspeed do the work for us. Again, you are allowed to move your embouchure when you play, but this is a great way to strengthen our embouchure and help you minimize any unnecessary movement you might have. Back on the horn, try to keep that vibration going. And now with the valves and hopefully a stronger sense of what our embouchure feels like, it should be much easier to try and create that feeling of the gliss-like connection that we did on the mouthpiece. With this better sense of connection established, remember to commit to that dynamic contrast that is conveyed in such a way that it's quite clear even to somebody sitting in the very back of a large recital hall. This short etude presents an opportunity to highlight or perhaps expose refined technical and musical aspects of horn playing. To summarize what we've discussed in this video, exaggeration is the key. Remind yourself with your tonguing to be more aggressive and think of using a clear T articulation, and try to engage your abdominal muscles to help push the air through that. Make sure with your dynamics to play out and showcase a refined contrast. Imagine how your sound might reflect off the back wall of a stage and reach the back of the hall. To help with that, make sure your hand position is open so that your hard work isn't undone by your right hand covering up and dampening the bell. Don't forget to play lyrically. Think about a gliss moving through long slurs and try buzzing like that on a mouthpiece to feel that vibration on your lips. And then recreate that feeling when you put the horn back together. And keep your embouchure's structure firm to help you keep that vibration going. Some of these concepts will take some time getting used to, so be quite diligent in your practice. Remind yourself that making changes like this that might be different from the way you're used to will take some time, so be patient. Also, please don't ignore your scale requirements. Scales should already be a part of your daily practice regimen. Having myself judged auditions like this many times over the years, I know from experience that a candidate who might present a perfectly executed and highly musical etude, but might butcher their scales, is almost always going to have a lower score than a candidate who doesn't execute the etude quite as well, but does know their scales. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions about what I've discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. Good luck and happy practicing.